You need to stop listening to the daily rumors about rates and dates for just a moment and focus on the single most important reality that is dictating the future of the Iraqi dinar. Because while the internet is full of noise about overnight riches, something profound and deeply complex is happening in the high-stakes world of international finance that most people are completely ignoring. In our last discussion, we analyzed Prime Minister al-Sudani's powerful signal regarding financial sovereignty and what that phrase truly means for a nation that has been economically occupied for 2 decades. But today, we have to take that analysis a critical step further, because declaring you want sovereignty and actually having the power to achieve it are 2 very different things. Sudani can stand at a podium in Baghdad and talk about a strong, independent dinar all day long, but the uncomfortable truth that every serious investor must confront is that the keys to Iraq's financial freedom are not held in Baghdad. They are held thousands of miles away in New York City at the United States Federal Reserve. To understand why a revaluation hasn't happened yet, and to understand what we are truly waiting for, we have to peel back the layers of history and look at the mechanism of control that was put in place after 2003. For nearly 20 years, Iraq's massive oil wealth, the lifeblood of its entire economy, has not flowed directly into Iraq's own treasury. Instead, when Iraq sells oil to the world, the payment in US dollars goes into an account sitting at the NY Federal Reserve, originally known as the Development Fund for Iraq, or DFI. Now, initially, following the war and the subsequent chaos, this setup was argued as necessary protection to prevent the assets from being seized by international creditors or looted due to internal corruption. And for a long time, Iraq operated under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which essentially labeled the country a threat to international peace and security, justifying this external financial guardianship. While Iraq is technically out of Chapter 7, the economic chains of that era remain firmly in place, because think about what this system practically means for a sovereign nation. It means that every time Iraq needs to pay its civil servants, build a bridge, fund a hospital, or even import basic goods, it effectively has to ask permission to access its own money. The Central Bank of Iraq has to request shipments of physical US dollars from its own account in New York to be flown into Baghdad on pallets. This is not how a sovereign nation operates, and it is certainly not the foundation upon which you can build an internationally recognized traded currency with a high value, because international investors and global markets will never respect or trust the dinar if the country itself doesn't even have the autonomy to manage its own bank account without foreign oversight. So, when Sudani talks about sovereignty, he isn't just talking about national pride. He is talking about breaking this specific cycle of dependency. He is talking about transitioning Iraq from a country that receives an allowance of its own money to a country that holds the checkbook. But why hasn't the US just handed over control, especially if they claim they want a stable Iraq? The answer brings us directly back to the topics we have discussed before, which are corruption, money laundering, and the financing of terrorism. For years, the US Treasury has watched with deep concern as billions of dollars shipped to Baghdad found their way out the back door of shady banks and currency auctions, flowing directly into the hands of sanctioned entities, terrorist organizations, and neighboring countries like Iran that are under US sanctions. The United States Federal Reserve is not going to release control of an oil account worth tens of billions of dollars a month if they believe that money is going to immediately weaponized against U.S. interests. This is the crux of the entire situation, and this is why the recent aggressive moves by the CBI are so critical and why they are being monitored so closely, not just by us, but by Washington. The push for a cashless society, the implementation of point-of-sale systems, the rigorous new compliance standards for Iraqi banks, and the banning of banks that fail to meet those standards are not just domestic economic policies designed to modernize Iraq. They are direct responses to US Treasury demands. They are the mandatory homework Iraq must finish before it graduates to financial independence. The U.S. has essentially told Iraq that if you want control of your oil revenue, you must prove that your banking system is sealed tight and that you can track every single dinar and dollar electronically so that funds are not leaking to the black market. This is why the war against the parallel market is so intense. The gap between the official rate and the street rate is the clearest indicator of how much money is still escaping official channels, and as long as that gap is wide, it signifies to the US Fed that the CBI does not yet have full control, and if the CBI doesn't have control, the Fed isn't going to give them more responsibility. But we are seeing significant progress, and this is where the hope lies for dinar holders, because recent high-level meetings between the CBI governor and US Treasury officials and the Federal Reserve indicate a shifting tide. The U.S. has begun to praise Iraq's compliance efforts, something we rarely heard in the past, and we are seeing the results on the ground as Iraq is slowly being allowed to diversify its holdings and use other currencies like the Chinese yuan or the UAE dirham for trade, which reduces the singular reliance on the U.S. dollar for every single transaction. These are baby steps towards sovereignty, but they are massive signals that the grip of the Federal Reserve is slowly, very slowly, loosening. We must understand that a revaluation of the currency is not the first step in this process. It is the final result. It is what happens when the financial plumbing is fixed, when the U.S. is satisfied that the system is secure, and when full control of the oil revenue is transferred back to Baghdad. When that account in New York is fully unlocked and Iraq can utilize its immense resource wealth without restriction, only then can the central bank confidently set a new, real value for the dinar that reflects the country's true economic power. Until that final key turns at the Federal Reserve, any talk of a new rate is premature because you cannot revalue a currency that you do not fully control. This process is agonizingly slow, and it is deeply frustrating for investors who have waited years. But if you look at the trajectory, the movement is undeniable. Iraq is moving away from a cash-based, chaotic economy riddled with black market leaks toward a digital, compliant system acceptable to the global banking community. The delays, whether they are political disagreements over the HCL or technical hurdles in banking implementation, are all part of building this massive new infrastructure. The destination has not changed, a sovereign Iraq with a strong global currency, but the road there goes directly through the compliance departments of the US Treasury and the Federal Reserve in New York, and that is the only signal that truly matters right now.